Thomas Heywood was a prominent English playwright, actor, and author. His main contributions were to late Elizabethan and early Jacobean theatre. Early years. Few details of Heywood's life have been documented with certainty. Most references indicate that the county of his birth was most likely Lincolnshire, while the year has been variously given as 1570, 1573, 1574 and 1575. It has been speculated that his father was a country parson and that he was related to the half-century earlier dramatist John Heywood, whose death year is, again, uncertain, but indicated as having occurred not earlier than 1575 and not later than 1589. Heywood is said to have been educated at the University of Cambridge, though his college is a matter of dispute. The persistent tradition that he was a fellow at Peterhouse was discussed and dismissed by a master of that college. Alternatively, there is evidence that Heywood was a member of Emmanuel. Subsequently, however, he moved to London, where the first mention of his dramatic career is a note in the diary of theatre entrepreneur Philip Henslow recording that he wrote a play for the Admiral's Men, an acting company, in October 1596. By 1598, he was regularly engaged as a player in the company. Since no wages are mentioned, he was presumably a sharer in the company, as was normal for important company members. He was later a member of other companies, including Lord Southampton's, Lord Strange's Men and Worcester's Men. During this time, Heywood was extremely prolific. In his preface to the English Traveller, he describes himself as having had an entire hand or at least a main finger in 220 plays. However, only 23 plays and 8 masques have survived that are accepted by historians as wholly or partially authored by him. Creative activity. Heywood's first play may have been The Four Prentices of London. This tale of 4 apprentices who become knights and travel to Jerusalem may have been intended as a burlesque of the old romances, but it is more likely that it was meant seriously to attract the apprentice spectators to whom it was dedicated. Its popularity was satirized in Beaumont and Fletcher's travesty of the middle-class taste in drama The Night of the Burning Pestle. Heywood's 2-part history plays Edward IV and If You Know Not Me, You Know Nobody, or The Troubles of Queen Elizabeth concern, respectively, the Wars of the Roses and the life of the Queen contrasted with that of the preeminent merchant and financier Thomas Gresham. He wrote for the stage, and protested against the printing of his works, saying he had no time to revise them. Johann Ludwig Tieck called him the model of elite and rare talent, and Charles Lamb wrote that he was a prose Shakespeare. Professor Ward, one of Heywood's most sympathetic editors, pointed out that Heywood had a keen eye for dramatic situations and great constructive skill, but his powers of characterization were not on a par with his stagecraft. Citation. He delighted in what he called merry accidents, that is, in coarse, broad farce. His fancy and invention were inexhaustible. Heywood's best-known plays are his domestic tragedies and comedies. His masterpiece is generally considered to be A Woman Killed with Kindness, a domestic tragedy about an adulterous wife, and a widely admired Plowton farce The English Traveller, which is also known for its informative preface, giving Heywood an opportunity to inform the reader about his prolific creative output. His citizen comedies are noteworthy because of their physicality and energy. They provide a psychogeography of the sights, smells, and sounds of London's wharfs, markets, shops, and streets, which contrasts with the more conventional generalizations about the sights of commerce, which are satirized in city comedies. Heywood wrote numerous prose works, mostly pamphlets about contemporary subjects, of interest now primarily to historians studying the period. His best-known long essay is An Apology for Actors, a moderately toned and reasonable reply to Puritan attacks on the stage, which contains a wealth of detailed information on the actors and acting conditions of Heywood's day. It is in the Epistle to the Printer, in this 1612 work, that Heywood writes about William Jaggard's appropriation of 2 of Heywood's poems for the same year's edition of The Passionate Pilgrim. In 1641 Heywood had printed the life of Merlin surnamed Ambrosius. The book chronicled all the kings of England dating back to the legendary King Brutus, who had come from Troy to start an exploration in a new colony, up to Charles I, who was the king when Heywood died. The book goes on to chronicle certain prophecies told by Merlin and the interpretations of each and explanation of each within the context of the modern world. Final 2 decades. Between 1619 and 1624, Heywood seems to have inexplicably ceased all activity as an actor, but from 1624 until his death 17 years later, his name frequently appears in contemporary accounts. In this period, Heywood was associated with Christopher Beeston's company at the Phoenix Theatre, Queen Henrietta's Men or Lady Elizabeth's Men. At the Phoenix, Heywood produced new plays such as The Captives, The English Traveller, and A Maidenhead Well Lost, as well as revivals of old plays. Numerous volumes of his prose and poetry were published, including 2 lengthy poetic works, Guneikion, described as 9 books of various history concerning women, and, 11 years later, The Hierarchy of the Blessed Angels. As a measure of Heywood's popular standing in the final years of his life, Love's Mistress or The Queen's Mask, a play published in 1636, but performed since 1634, was reported to have been seen by King Charles I and his queen 3 times in 8 days. According to writings of the period, Thomas Heywood had been living in Clerkenwell since 1623, and it was there, at St. James's Church, that he was buried 18 years later. Because of the uncertainty regarding the year of his birth, his age can only be estimated, but he was likely in his late 60s, possibly having reached 70. The date of the burial, the 16th of August 1641, the only documented date, also appears in a number of reference books as Heywood's death date. Although he may actually have died days earlier, it may be presumed, however, that due to a possible August heatwave, the burial occurred on an expedited basis. Primary literary output: The Royal King and the Loyal Subject. The 2 parts of The Fair Maid of the West, or A Girl Worth Gold. The Fair Maid of the Exchange, a play doubtfully attributed to Heywood. The Late Lancashire Witches, written with Richard Brome and prompted by an actual trial in the preceding year. A Maidenhead Well Lost, a challenge for beauty. The Wise Woman of Hogston, the witchcraft in this case being matter for comedy, not seriously treated as in the Lancashire play. Fortune by Land and Sea, with William Rowley. The 5 plays called respectively The Golden Age, The Silver Age, The Brazen Age and The Iron Age, dated 1611, 1613, 1613 and 1632. A series of classical stories strung together with no particular connection except that Old Homer introduces the performers of each act in turn. Love's Mistress or The Queen's Mask, the story of Cupid and Psyche as told by Apuleius. The Tragedy of the Rape of Lucrece, which chronicles the rise and fall of Tarquin as presented by a merry Lord, Valerius, who lightens the gloom of the situation by singing comic songs. The Conspiracy of Catiline, and War of Jugurth, translations of Sallust. A series of pageants, most of them devised for the City of London, or its guilds, by Heywood, printed in 1637. In Volume IV of his collection of Old English plays, H. Berlin printed for the first time a comedy by Heywood, The Captives, or The Lost Recovered, and in Volume E of the same series, Dicker of Devonshire, which he tentatively assigns to the same hand. Troia Britannica, or Great Britain's Troy, a poem in 17 cantos, intermixed with many pleasant poetical tales, and concluding with an universal chronicle from the creation until the present time. An Apology for Actors, containing 3 brief treatises, edited for the Shakespeare Society in 1841. Guneikion, or 9 books of various history concerning women. England's Elizabeth, her life and troubles during her minority from time cradle to the crown. The Hierarchy of the Blessed Angels, a didactic poem in 9 books. A Woman Killed with Kindness. pleasant dialogue, and dramas selected out of Lucian, etc. The Life of Merlin surnamed Ambrosius.